For most of our lives, we've been told the same story, that human evolution was a steady climb, a march of progress from primitive ancestors to the intelligent beings we are today. It's a comforting tale, one that places us at the peak of a long and inevitable ascent. But what if that story is only half true? What if our rise didn't come from continuous improvement, but from the disappearance of those who once shared this planet with us? Imagine a time, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when Homo sapiens was not alone. We were just one branch among many. The Earth was home to the Neanderthals, who ruled the frozen plains of Europe, the Denisovans, who thrived in the high plateaus of Asia, the ancient Homo erectus, who walked the islands of Indonesia, and even the tiny yet mysterious species of Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis, hidden deep in the jungles of Southeast Asia. They were not myths, they were real people, with fire, tools, families, and fears. For most of our existence, they lived beside us, rivals, neighbors, perhaps even lovers. But one by one, they disappeared, until only we remained. What if their extinction was not an accident of time, but the very key that unlocked our full potential? What if their absence, not their presence, made us truly human? Every great leap forward in art, language, and imagination seems to have come after they were gone. Maybe the path to our dominance wasn't built on constant progress, but on the silent vanishing of those who once shared our world. To become what we are, other humans had to fade away. It's a haunting thought, but also a revealing one, because within each of us still lies a trace of them, fragments of ancient DNA whispering stories of a world once crowded with humankinds. And it's from that hidden inheritance that our story truly begins. Every person alive today carries echoes of ancient blood. Hidden inside our DNA are the fingerprints of other kinds of humans, long vanished but never entirely gone. Genetic studies reveal that people outside Africa carry about 1 to 2% of Neanderthal DNA, while populations in Australia and Melanesia hold even more, up to 6% of Denisovan ancestry. It may sound like a small number, but within those fragments lie the remains of encounters that changed the destiny of our species. When Homo sapiens met these ancient cousins tens of thousands of years ago, they didn't just exchange fire or tools, they exchanged genes. For generations, scientists imagined this interbreeding as harmless blending, but the evidence tells a more complicated story. Scattered across the human genome are vast, empty regions where archaic DNA has been almost completely erased. These are what geneticists call genetic deserts. Many of these barren zones cluster around genes linked to male fertility, suggesting that hybrid males often struggle to reproduce. Over time, natural selection quietly purged the incompatible code, pruning away what didn't fit. The process left traces, like scars within the genome, reminders of a struggle fought not with weapons, but with biology itself. This slow purging created what researchers now describe as a kind of genetic drag. Each time modern humans mated with their ancient relatives, maladaptive genes entered the population. Some weakened immune systems, others reduced reproductive success, or slowed physical adaptation to new environments. As long as those archaic groups survived, the genetic drag continued a subtle but constant resistance, holding evolution back. Only when Neanderthals and Denisovans disappeared did the stream of harmful variants finally stop. Freed from this genetic friction, Homo sapiens began to evolve with startling speed. Yet not every inheritance was poisonous. A few genes from those ancient unions turned out to be gifts. One remarkable example is EPAS1, a Denisovan gene that helps Tibetans live and breathe at extreme altitudes where oxygen is thin. Another is a cluster of Neanderthal genes, known as OAS, which strengthened parts of our immune system against ancient viruses. But nature always balances its rewards with risks. On chromosome 3, a stretch of Neanderthal DNA still lingers in millions of people today, and it is now linked to more severe outcomes from COVID-19. In our veins, the past still whispers, for better and for worse. This is the paradox of our inheritance, the forbidden fruit of evolution. Those ancient encounters gave us both medicine and poison, blessings and burdens interwoven in the same double helix. Without them, we might lack certain strengths that helped our ancestors survive in ice, altitude, and darkness. But because of them, we also carried weaknesses that nature spent millennia correcting. The extinction of our archaic kin was not just a tragedy in flesh and bone, it was a turning point written in code. When their genes stopped flowing into ours, evolution shifted gears. The engine that had long sputtered began to roar, and while their DNA still lingers as faint whispers inside us, their absence freed our species to become something new. Because the truth is this: our story of progress began not only in the mind, but deep within the molecule of life itself. The death of their line became the rebirth of ours. Yet the world we shared with them was more than genetic. Their bodies once filled the same forests, hunted the same prey, and walked the same paths. Their extinction didn't just clean our DNA, it cleared the Earth itself. And that is where the next part of our story begins. Long before cities and borders, before the world belonged to a single kind of human, Earth was a crowded place. Imagine looking at a map of the ancient world. In the icy plains and dense forests of Europe and Western Asia, the Neanderthals ruled. Stocky, powerful, perfectly built for cold climates, they hunted mammoths and rhinoceros across frozen valleys. To the east, high in the mountains of Central and Eastern Asia, lived the Denisovans' mysterious cousins adapted to thin air and harsh altitudes. Farther south, the old giant, Homo erectus, still wandered the islands of Indonesia, a survivor from a deeper past who had once been the first to stand tall and wield fire. And in the tropical islands of Southeast Asia, two smaller species clung to existence: Homo floresiensis, the hobbit of Flores, and Homo luzonensis, hidden in the caves of the Philippines. Each species had carved its own domain. Each had its own way of surviving. For hundreds of thousands of years, these humans shared the planet, their territories forming invisible walls. Every group filled a specific ecological niche, a unique combination of climate, prey, and landscape. To step into another species' niche meant direct conflict. For Homo sapiens, who emerged from Africa with new tools and restless curiosity, the world was not empty. It was already taken. Every valley, every hunting ground, every shoreline had its rulers. The Neanderthals were master hunters in the north, Denisovans controlled the plateaus, and the islands were guarded by ancient lineages that had lived there for millennia. The struggle between them was not constant war, but a quiet competition for space, food, and survival. Like wolves and coyotes sharing a forest, they could not all thrive in the same territory. Sometimes they exchanged ideas, sometimes mates, and sometimes they fought, but in the end, every meeting was a test of endurance. For modern humans, spreading into these occupied lands was like trying to breathe in a room already full. Progress was slow. Populations grew in one area, then stalled or vanished in another. The Earth was vast, but opportunity was scarce. Then, one by one, the others began to disappear. Climate shifts, dwindling resources, and encounters with expanding sapiens populations gradually erased them from the map. As each species vanished, the world opened a little wider. The frozen plains, once ruled by Neanderthals, became new hunting grounds. The mountains, once held by Denisovans, were now open paths across Asia. The islands once home to Homo erectus, floresiensis, and luzonensis became stepping stones toward Australia and the Pacific. With every extinction, Homo sapiens stepped forward into the space left behind. The crowded Earth began to empty, and our ancestors filled the silence. This was more than conquest, it was liberation on an evolutionary scale. For the first time, a single species could spread across every continent without another kind of human to rival it. Freed from competition, Homo sapiens expanded like water finding its level, flowing into every corner of the world. Forests, deserts, tundra, and islands all became ours. The barriers that had slowed our journey fell away, and the planet itself seemed to invite us in. And with that newfound freedom, something else began to awaken imagination, creativity, and the hunger to shape the world, not just survive in it. The disappearance of our rivals did not only clear the land, it cleared the way for the human mind to bloom. With the world finally open and the last of our cousins fading into memory, something extraordinary began to happen. Around 40,000 years ago, at the very moment the Neanderthals vanished, a new light flickered in the darkness. Archaeologists call it the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, a sudden surge of creativity and imagination that transformed humanity forever. From this period onward, the traces of our presence change completely. The rough stone tools of survival give way to objects of meaning, beauty, and thought. In the caves of Europe, like Chauvet and Lascaux, the walls came alive with color and motion. Horses, lions, bison, and human figures danced in flickering torchlight, painted with precision and emotion that still moves us tens of thousands of years later. These were not just drawings, they were expressions of consciousness. In bones and ivory, early humans carved flutes that sang the first songs ever heard by human ears. They shaped ornaments and jewelry, laid their dead to rest with ochre, shells, and offerings, hinting at beliefs that reached beyond death. For the first time, we see evidence not just of intelligence, but of imagination. Across continents, the same spark caught fire. In Europe, art blossomed after the Neanderthals' disappearance. Yet in Africa, it had already begun to glow. Deep in the Blombos Cave of South Africa, far earlier, 70 to 100,000 years ago, people mixed pigments, etched geometric designs, and strung tiny shells into necklaces. The seeds of symbolic thought had been planted long before the great European explosion. The difference was that, once the world belonged to a single species, those sparks could finally spread without limit. This is what scientists now call the cultural ratchet effect. When multiple human species coexisted, knowledge was fragmented, locked within isolated groups. A clever idea born among Neanderthals or Denisovans could vanish with them. But when only Homo sapiens remained, ideas could flow freely across ever-growing networks of people. Each generation learned from the last, adding, refining, and expanding. Innovation no longer restarted from zero. It built upward like gears, turning in one direction only a ratchet that never slipped backward. The results were explosive. Art became more complex, tools more efficient, societies more connected. Long-distance trade networks stretched across hundreds of miles, carrying shells from the coast to inland valleys and obsidian blades from mountains to deserts. Symbols became stories, stories became myths, and myths began to bind people together. The human mind, once confined by competition and isolation, found its full range. When the last barriers of biology and territory fell, creativity flowed like a river released from a dam. Freed from division, our species began to imagine futures instead of merely surviving the present. Civilization's first foundations were laid not in stone, but in thought, in the shared dream that we were something more than flesh and bone. When only one kind of human remained, culture itself accelerated, spinning faster with every generation. Like a wheel freed from the mud, humanity finally began to roll forward, unstoppable. Not all journeys through history move at the same pace. When Homo sapiens first reached Europe, around 50 to 55,000 years ago, the continent was already claimed by another kind of human, the Neanderthals. For more than 10,000 years, the two species shared mountains, rivers, and hunting grounds. They met, traded, sometimes fought, and sometimes loved. The archaeological record shows traces of cultural exchange tools that blur the line between Neanderthal craftsmanship and modern human design, pigments and ornaments that suggest shared ideas. But it was not a peaceful coexistence. Every step forward came with resistance. The process of taking over Europe stretched across tens of thousands of years, slowed by competition for land, food, and the invisible boundaries of adaptation. Progress here was measured not in centuries, but in millennia. Now picture a different scene, far across the ocean and far later in time. Around 15 to 20,000 years ago, perhaps a bit earlier. Depending on which evidence you believe the first humans set foot in the Americas, they arrived to a vast, uninhabited wilderness. There were mammoths, giant sloths, and saber-toothed cats, but no other species of human to stand in their way. Within a few thousand years, they had spread from Alaska to Patagonia, filling the continents with tribes, languages, and cultures. Compared to the slow and painful conquest of Europe, this expansion was almost instantaneous, a wave of humanity rolling across open land. The difference between the two worlds is striking. In Europe, Homo sapiens had to confront and absorb their ancient relatives. Every interaction carried genetic consequences, the exchange of DNA that brought both gifts and burdens. Each new territory demanded negotiation, competition, and sometimes extinction. In the Americas, there was no such obstacle. No rivals to compete for resources, no hybrid offspring to slow adaptation. It was a clean slate, a test of what our species could achieve when nothing held it back. Without competitors, the wheel of expansion turned freely, accelerating faster than ever before. It's a simple truth hidden within the timeline of our past. When the path is crowded, evolution hesitates. When it's clear, it races ahead. The Americas were the open road, and humanity sped down it with the full force of its potential. But every open road has a cost, and the freedom that followed was built on the silence left behind by others. Because evolution is not just about speed or survival, it's also about the moral weight of what it takes to exist. In the story of our rise, there lies a forbidden fruit, a gift that was also a curse. When different human species walked the earth together, curiosity and desire drew them toward one another. They shared warmth, tools, and genes. Each encounter was both temptation and danger. Those unions gave us new abilities, but also carried invisible poisons within our DNA. As long as they lived, the flow of these archaic genes continued, a slow drip of both strength and weakness. But when they were gone, that current stopped. The poison ceased to flow. For the first time in our evolutionary history, Homo sapiens stood alone, untainted, free to evolve without the drag of genetic incompatibility. Extinction, cruel as it sounds, was a cleansing event. It cut the cord that tied us to our past mistakes, pruning the genetic tree so that only the most adaptive branches remained. Our genome grew leaner, more efficient, and ready to change at unprecedented speed. But the transformation was not just biological. With no other humans to divide the world with, the psychological and cultural boundaries began to dissolve as well. Ideas flowed more easily. Communities grew larger. Imagination expanded into every space once occupied by competition. The silence left by other humans became the echo chamber in which our own consciousness deepened. Of course, not everyone agrees on this view. Some scientists argue that the great leap in creativity after 40,000 years ago came not from extinction, but from population growth, shifting climates, or social complexity reaching a critical mass. Perhaps those forces all played their part. Yet the pattern remains striking. Every region where other species disappeared became a cradle of innovation soon after. The absence of rivals and the end of maladaptive interbreeding seemed to coincide, again and again, with bursts of progress that reshaped the human story. In the cold logic of evolution, creation and destruction are often two sides of the same process. The death of one lineage feeds the life of another. For Homo sapiens, the disappearance of our ancient kin was both tragedy and triumph, the closing of one chapter and the ignition of another. Their extinction marked not only their end but our true beginning. The death of their kind was, in a sense, the birth of ours. Looking back across the ages, a single truth begins to emerge. Our story was written not just by what we gained, but by what we lost. When our ancestors mingled with other kinds of humans, they inherited both gifts and burdens. Interbreeding carried fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA into our veins, fragments that strengthened our immunity, but also weakened our fertility. Ecological competition forced us to fight for space, for prey, for survival itself. For a long time, these forces held us in balance, brilliant but restrained, capable but contained. And then, the others were gone. With their disappearance, the locks fell away. Evolution accelerated. Culture exploded. The human mind finally had room to stretch. Today, deep inside every one of us, those encounters still linger. A few % of Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA hums quietly within our genome, like ancient ghosts murmuring reminders of who we used to be. They are the echoes of a vanished world, one where we were not alone. But the rest of our code, the vast majority that drives our creativity, our empathy, our ability to imagine and to build, was shaped in a world freed from rivals. The emptiness they left behind became the canvas upon which we painted everything that makes us human. Perhaps evolution was never simply about survival of the fittest, but about the release of potential long suppressed. It was not the presence of struggle that made us grow, but the moment the noise quieted and our own voice could finally be heard. If Neanderthals had survived, if Denisovans still walked the earth beside us, would we have ever reached the stars? Would we have ever thought to paint the walls of our caves, to question the universe, to dream of tomorrow? In the end, our rise came at a price, the silence of those who came before. Their extinction was both an ending and a beginning, a tragedy that cleared the path for the triumph of imagination. To become fully human, others had to vanish, and in that loss lies the most haunting truth of all. The greatest creation of evolution was born from extinction itself. That is the beautiful tragedy and the eternal inheritance of being human.